I buried my friend Tommy last spring, 84 years old. Good man, retired engineer, kept his lung perfect, right up until he couldn't. At the graveside, his daughter said something I haven't been able to shake since. She said, he didn't really start dying when his heart gave out. He started dying the day he stopped having anywhere to be. I stood there in the cold with my hands in my coat pockets, and I thought, she's right. I've watched that happen to men, good men, strong men, men who survived things that should have killed them. And then retirement came, or their wife passed, or their kids moved far away, and something just went out of them like a pilot light. I'm 91 years old. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. People ask me sometimes, my doctor included, how I'm still doing as well as I am. I've got the usual complaints, knees that sound like a gravel road when I climb stairs, mornings that take a little longer to get started. I'm not going to pretend I feel 30. I don't, but I'm here. And more than here, I'm interested. I wake up and I have things I want to do that day. Real things, not just things to kill time. My doctor looked at my blood work last fall, looked up at me over his glasses and said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And I smiled because I knew exactly what I was doing. And it had nothing to do with diet or vitamins or how many steps I get. I'll tell you what it is. But first, I want to tell you about my father. My father retired at 67, worked 31 years at the same machine shop in western Pennsylvania, got a watch, got a handshake, drove home, and sat down in his chair. And that was it. He wasn't a complainer, wasn't dramatic about it. He just settled, like a house that finally stops shifting. I'd visit on Sundays and the television would be on, but he wouldn't really be watching it. He'd be somewhere else, inside himself. And when I'd ask how he was doing, he'd say, oh, fine, fine. The way men of his generation always said fine when they meant something else entirely. He lived another 12 years after he retired. 12 years. But I'm not sure he was truly alive for most of them. I remember one Sunday, this was maybe 3 or 4 years after he stopped working. I came in and he was sitting at the kitchen table, just sitting, not reading, not eating. The light was coming in gray through the window, November light, cold and flat, and the house smelled like old coffee and quiet. I sat down across from him and I said, Dad, what do you want to do today? He looked at me for a long moment and he said, I don't know, son. I don't know what I want anymore. That sentence has followed me my whole life. I was in my 40s then, and I didn't fully understand it. I thought it was depression, maybe, or loneliness. But sitting at Tommy's graveside last spring, I finally understood what my father meant. He hadn't lost the will to live. He'd lost the reason to show up. There's a difference, a painful, real difference. I spent a lot of years being useful at work. I was a high school history teacher for 38 years, small town in Ohio. Same school, mostly the same hallways. You'd think that would get old, and honestly, some years it did. But there was always a kid. There was always one kid in the back row who was either sleeping through everything or was about to do something terrible with his life. And if you paid enough attention, you could reach him. Not always, but sometimes. Those sometimes kept me going. I retired at 69, a little later than most. My wife, Margaret, had been after me to slow down for years, and she was right. I was tired. But when I walked out of that building for the last time, I felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness exactly, more like a loosening, like a rope that had been holding something important suddenly went slack. The first year was fine. Margaret and I traveled a little. I read books I'd always meant to read. I slept in. That was good. I needed that. But by year two, I started noticing something. I'd get to the end of a day and I couldn't really account for it. I'd ask myself, what did you do today? And the answer would be nothing that mattered. Watched the news, took a walk, made lunch, watched more news. And I started feeling something I hadn't felt in decades, invisible. Not lonely exactly. Margaret was there. I talked to my son on the phone. I wasn't isolated. But I felt invisible in a specific way, like I wasn't producing anything for the world anymore, like the world was turning just fine without me, and nobody needed me to show up anywhere. And that feeling, that particular feeling, I think that's what starts to kill men. My neighbor across the street, woman named Dottie, must have been in her mid-70s then, knocked on my door one Tuesday morning. This was maybe 2.5 years into retirement. She had a leaky faucet she couldn't fix. Her husband had passed a couple of years before. She had no idea who else to call. I'm a decent handyman, not exceptional, but I know my way around a wrench. I went over. Took me maybe 45 minutes. She made coffee afterward, and we sat at her kitchen table and talked for almost 2 hours. She told me about her son in Arizona, her worries about winter, a book she'd been reading. Nothing extraordinary. But when I walked back across the street that afternoon, I noticed something. I felt awake. Not just not tired, awake, alert. The kind of alive you feel when something actually happened that day, when you were needed. Margaret noticed too. She said, "You look different." I said, I went and helped Dottie with her faucet. She nodded, like she already knew something I was just figuring out. After that, I started paying attention differently. The kid 2 houses down who was struggling with math. The elderly man at the library who couldn't figure out how to print something from the computer. The food pantry at the church that needed volunteers on Thursday mornings. Nothing heroic, nothing that would make the news, just small, ordinary, human things that needed doing. And every time I did one of those things, every single time, I felt it. That pilot light, still on. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make this sound like charity work saved my soul. That's too clean, too neat. The truth is messier than that. There were days I helped people and felt nothing afterward. Days I was too tired, too creaky, too much inside my own head. Days where the ache in my knees made me ornery, and I wasn't particularly good company for anyone. I'm not talking about some magical cure. I'm talking about something more stubborn than that. I'm talking about the difference between a life that's pointed at something and a life that's just running out. My father's life ran out, even though he had time left. 12 years of time. And what I think happened, what I've come to believe, is that nobody told him he was still needed. Nobody gave him a place to put his energy. He'd given everything to the shop for 31 years, and when they were done with him, he had no idea how to redirect it. That wasn't weakness. That was a kind of abandonment nobody talked about back then. Men of his generation weren't allowed to talk about things like purpose and meaning. That sounded soft. You worked, you provided, and when the work was gone, you waited. That's just how it was. But I've watched what that waiting does to a man. I've watched it up close. And I decided, maybe consciously, maybe not, I'm not entirely sure, that I wasn't going to do that. That I was going to stay aimed at something, even if the target kept changing, even if some days I missed completely. Margaret passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. She was gone in less than 3 months from diagnosis. 79 years old, 44 years married. I'm not going to spend a long time on this because I still can't talk about it the right way. Some things don't have the right words yet. What I will say is this. After she was gone, I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. I understood how easy it would be to just let go. Not dramatically, not in any way anyone would worry about, just slowly, day by day. Stop going places. Stop calling people. Stop repairing the fence. Stop showing up. The grief makes it easy to justify. You're tired. You're old. You've earned the right to sit down. And I did sit down for a while. But then, and I'm not entirely sure why, I went back across the street to check on Dottie. She was 80 by then, moving slower. I'd been so absorbed in losing Margaret that I hadn't been over in months. When she opened the door and saw me, her face changed in a way that I felt in my chest. She said, "I've been worried about you. Not, I'm glad you're here. Not about time." She said she'd been worried about me. And I thought, this woman has her own troubles, her own aches, her own loneliness. And she used some of that energy to worry about me. I stepped inside. She put coffee on, and I thought, I have to stay. Not for dramatic reasons, not because I figured something out, just because there are still people who are glad when I walk through the door. And as long as that's true, I have an obligation to that gladness. Here's what I've come to understand 91 years in. Being useful isn't just about doing things for people. It's something more internal than that. It's about staying in relationship with the world. When you stop being useful, you start to observe life instead of participate in it. You watch the news instead of talking to your neighbor. You sit in the car and look at the grocery store instead of going inside. You tell yourself you'll call tomorrow, and then tomorrow becomes the day after, and then it's been a month. I know that drift. I've felt it. And what I know now is that the only thing that reverses it, for me anyway, is having someone expect something of me. Doesn't have to be big. The library still asks me to come in Tuesday mornings. There's a reading program for kids who are behind. I sit with a child for an hour and we read together. I'm not a saint for doing it. Half the time I'm tired and my back hurts, and I'd honestly rather be home with a cup of coffee. But I go because that child is going to be there, and they're going to look up when they hear the door. And for that hour, I'm someone who showed up when they needed me to. And that is, I believe this completely. That is the reason I'm still here. Not because of luck, not because I ate right or exercised enough or had good genes, because I never let myself become someone the world didn't need anymore. I think about my father sometimes, late evenings when the light is going and the house gets quiet. I think about him sitting at that kitchen table, the gray November light, the old coffee smell, and I think, what if someone had needed something from him that day? What if someone had knocked on his door and said, "Frank, I need your help with something. What if he'd had somewhere to be the next morning? I think he would have gone. I think most men would go if someone just asked them. That's the part that breaks my heart. Not that my father faded, but that nobody asked him not to. If you're watching this, and I mean you specifically, whoever you are, I want you to think about someone in your life who might be sitting at that kitchen table right now, not obviously struggling, not asking for anything, just quiet, just going through the motions, just waiting for something they've stopped expecting. And I want you to think about whether you could give them something to do, not out of pity, never out of pity, but because you need them, because they actually have something to offer, because they are still in there. That pilot light is still on. It's just low. And it needs someone to come close enough to feel it. That's all. That's everything I know. 91 years, and that's what I've got. Be useful. Stay useful. And when you can't find a use for yourself, find someone who can use you, because they're out there. They're waiting, just like you are. Tommy would have liked that, I think. He would have agreed. Anyway, that's enough from me for today.